The morning mist still clung to the fields of eastern France as Sergeant Daniel Harper leaned out of the open turret of his M18 Hellcat. The engine beneath him hummed with a restless energy, like a predator waiting for the moment to strike. Around him, the rest of his crew moved with quiet precision. They had done this many times before, but the tension never faded. Speed was their armor, and hesitation could mean death. Harper had seen what happened to slower machines. Burned-out hulks of Shermans and German Panzers littered roads and hedgerows alike. Steel alone did not guarantee survival. The Hellcat was different. It was built not to endure punishment, but to avoid it entirely. At full throttle, it could outrun almost anything on the battlefield, reaching speeds that seemed impossible for a tracked vehicle. 55 miles per hour. To many, it sounded like a myth. To Harper, it was the only reason he was still alive. "Driver, keep her ready," Harper said, his voice steady but low. Private Collins nodded from his position, hands resting on the controls, eyes scanning the narrow dirt road ahead. The engine responded with a subtle growl, eager. The Hellcat had been designed with one purpose: destroy enemy tanks before they even knew what hit them. It carried a powerful 76mm gun, capable of punching through German armor under the right conditions. But it came at a cost. The armor protecting the crew was thin, dangerously thin. A direct hit from almost any German gun would tear through them like paper. That was the gamble. Strike first, strike fast, and disappear before the enemy could respond. Harper remembered the first time he saw the Hellcat. It didn't look intimidating like the heavier tanks. It looked lean, almost fragile. Some soldiers even joked that it was too fast for its own good. But the veterans knew better. Speed wasn't just an advantage, it was a weapon. A distant rumble broke the silence. Harper raised his binoculars and scanned the tree line. Movement, faint but unmistakable, German armor. "Contact," he said sharply, "about 800 yards, moving left to right." Inside the turret, Corporal Jenkins adjusted the gun, his movements calm and practiced. Loader Evans stood ready, a shell already in his hands. The crew worked like a single organism, each man knowing exactly what to do without needing to be told twice. Harper lowered the binoculars. "We don't wait, we hit and move." That was always the rule. Through the mist, the outline of a German Panther tank became clearer. It was a formidable opponent, thick armor, a deadly gun, and a reputation that made even experienced crews uneasy. But it was slower. That was the Hellcat's advantage. "Range 700 yards, Jenkins called out. "Fire when ready." The Hellcat's gun roared, the recoil shaking the entire vehicle. The shells streaked across the field and struck the Panther's side armor. A flash, smoke. The German tank lurched, caught off guard. "Hit," Evans shouted. "Don't wait, move," Harper barked. Collins slammed the controls forward, and the Hellcat surged into motion. Dirt and gravel sprayed behind them as they accelerated, weaving between trees and hedgerows. Within seconds, they were no longer where they had fired from. That was the key: never stay still, never give the enemy time to react. Behind them, chaos unfolded. The Panther's crew scrambled, trying to locate the attacker. But the Hellcat was already gone, its speed turning it into a ghost on the battlefield. Harper allowed himself a brief glance back. The enemy tank was still there, damaged and confused. But he knew better than to watch too long. Survival depended on movement, not curiosity. Inside the Hellcat, the crew exchanged quick looks. No cheers, no celebration, just quiet understanding. They had done their job for now. This was the reality of the fastest tank destroyer of the war. It wasn't about brute strength or heavy armor. It was about timing, precision, and speed. The Hellcat didn't fight like other tanks. It hunted. And on battlefields where seconds decided everything, being the fastest predator meant the difference between life and death. The road stretched ahead like a thin scar cutting through the countryside of Belgium. It was early winter, and the cold air bit through every layer of clothing the crew wore. Inside the M18 Hellcat, Sergeant Daniel Harper could feel the vibration of the engine beneath his boots, steady and powerful. They were moving fast, faster than any tank had a right to move. 40 miles per hour, Collins called out, eyes fixed on the road. "Push it," Harper replied. The engine roared louder, and the Hellcat surged forward. 50 miles per hour on uneven ground felt like flying. Trees blurred past them, fences disappeared in seconds, and the wind tore through the open turret. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Most tanks were built to survive hits. The Hellcat was built to avoid them entirely. Harper had learned that lesson the hard way. A week earlier, they had been positioned near a small village, waiting for German armor to advance. The plan was simple: ambush, fire, relocate, but war rarely followed simple plans. Another American unit, equipped with heavier Shermans, had taken position nearby. When the German counterattack came, the Shermans held their ground. Harper remembered watching through his binoculars as the first German shell struck. The explosion tore through the lead Sherman, flames erupting instantly. The tank didn't move again. "Too slow," Jenkins had muttered back then. The Hellcat crew didn't stay to fight. They couldn't afford to. Harper gave the order, and within seconds they were gone, racing across open ground while shells landed behind them. The difference was clear. Armor might buy you a second chance, but speed kept you from needing one. Now, as they sped down the narrow road, Harper couldn't ignore the other side of that reality. "Contact possible ahead," Evans said, scanning nervously. Harper nodded. "Stay sharp." The Hellcat's thin armor meant every encounter was a gamble. Even small-caliber anti-tank weapons could penetrate them. Machine gun fire could ricochet dangerously inside the open turret. Shrapnel, snipers, even artillery fragments, everything was a threat. They were fast, yes, but they were exposed. Suddenly, Collins slammed the brakes. "Movement, right side." The Hellcat skidded slightly before stopping. Harper turned just in time to see it, a German anti-tank gun partially concealed behind a stone wall. The crew was already moving, trying to aim. "Gun up," Harper shouted. Jenkins swung the turret, but they were seconds away from being too late. "Drive now." Harper changed his mind instantly. Collins didn't hesitate. The Hellcat lunged forward again, engines screaming. A shot rang out behind them. The shells struck the ground where they had been just moments before, sending dirt and debris into the air. Inside the vehicle, no one spoke for a second. That was the trade-off. If they had stayed, if they had tried to fight head-on, they would have been destroyed. The Hellcat's gun was powerful, but its protection was nearly non-existent. Every decision had to be made in an instant: fight or flee. Harper exhaled slowly. "That's why we move." Jenkins nodded, still gripping the controls of the turret. "And why we don't stop unless we have to." The Hellcat wasn't forgiving. It demanded constant awareness, constant motion. There was no room for hesitation or pride. Other crews might stand their ground, trusting their armor to protect them. Hellcat crews knew better. Their survival depended on discipline. As they continued down the road, Harper thought about the engineers who had designed the machine beneath him. They had made a choice: sacrifice protection for speed. It wasn't an easy decision, and not everyone agreed with it. Some called the Hellcat reckless, even dangerous. But for those who fought in it, the logic was undeniable. Speed gave them control. It allowed them to choose when to engage and when to disappear. It turned them into hunters instead of targets. Ahead, the road curved into a wooded area. Shadows stretched across the path, hiding whatever might be waiting. Harper raised his binoculars again, scanning carefully. "Slow it down," he said quietly. Collins eased off the throttle, and the Hellcat settled into a more cautious pace. Even the fastest predator knew when to move carefully. Because in a machine built for speed, one mistake was all it took. And no amount of speed could outrun a shell you never saw coming. The late afternoon sun hung low over the rolling fields near the German border, casting long shadows across the terrain. Inside a Panther tank, Oberfeldwebel Karl Fischer wiped the sweat from his brow despite the cold. The interior smelled of oil, metal, and tension. His crew sat in silence, each man listening for something they could not yet see. They had been warned. American tank destroyers were operating in the area, fast ones, too fast. Fisher had fought against Shermans before. He understood them. They advanced, they fired, they held ground. Predictable, but these new vehicles were different. Reports described them as ghosts, appearing suddenly, striking, then vanishing before a proper response could be made. "Stay alert," Fisher said, his voice firm but controlled. "They won't give us time." The Panther moved slowly along a dirt path, its powerful engine rumbling steadily. Its armor was thick, its gun deadly accurate. On paper, it was superior to most Allied vehicles, but paper didn't capture what was happening out here. "Commander, left ridge," the gunner said suddenly. Fisher raised his binoculars. For a brief moment he saw it, a low silhouette against the horizon. Small, fast. "Target tank destroyer," he shouted. Before the gunner could fully adjust, a flash erupted from the ridge. Impact! The Panther shook violently as the shell struck its side. Not a fatal hit, but enough to rattle every man inside. Sparks flew, and the driver cursed under his breath. "Where is it?" the loader yelled. Fisher scanned the ridge again. Nothing. It was gone. "Reload, scan the tree line," Fisher ordered. His heart pounded. They had seconds, maybe less. The enemy wouldn't stay. They would reposition, strike again from another angle. "Right side, movement," the driver shouted. Fisher turned just in time to catch a glimpse of it, another flash of movement between the trees, faster than seemed possible. "Traverse right, quickly." The turret began to turn, but it wasn't fast enough. Another shot. This time the shell hit closer to the turret ring. The Panther jolted, and a loud metallic crack echoed inside. The crew flinched instinctively. "Damage report," Fisher demanded. "Still operational, but we can't take many more like that," the gunner replied. Fisher clenched his jaw. They were being hunted. "Find it," he snapped. But that was the problem. There was nothing to find. The Hellcat had already moved again, its speed turning the battlefield into a shifting maze. It never stayed in one place long enough to be targeted. It struck, relocated, and struck again, forcing its enemy into constant reaction. Inside the Panther, time felt distorted. Every second stretched, filled with uncertainty. "Commander, how many are out there?" the loader asked quietly. Fisher didn't answer immediately. He didn't know. One Hellcat could create this kind of chaos. More than one, it would be a nightmare. "Doesn't matter," he said finally. "We focus, we survive." Another distant engine noise echoed faintly across the field, high-pitched, fast, not like the deep rumble of German armor. "They're circling us," the driver said. Fisher realized the truth in that moment. This wasn't a traditional engagement. There was no front line, no clear direction. The enemy dictated the pace entirely. And they were faster. "Reverse, get us behind cover," Fisher ordered. The Panther began to move backward, its engines straining as it tried to reposition. But even as they moved, Fisher knew the danger hadn't passed. They had been engaged for less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes, and already they had taken multiple hits, lost situational awareness, and been forced into retreat. Another flash appeared in the distance. "Incoming," someone shouted. The shell struck the ground nearby, sending a shockwave through the tank. Dirt and debris rained down on the hull. Fisher gripped the edge of the turret, his knuckles white. This was what the reports meant. Not just speed, but pressure. Relentless, disorienting pressure that gave no time to think, no time to plan, only react. And reacting was never enough. "Keep moving," Fisher shouted. Because stopping, even for a moment, meant giving the enemy exactly what they wanted. A target. Out in the fading light, the Hellcat moved again, already repositioning for another strike. Invisible for now, untouchable. And somewhere in the chaos of engines, gunfire, and dust, the German crew understood something they had never faced before. They weren't in control of this battle. They were surviving it second by second. The forest road was barely visible beneath the thick canopy of trees, its narrow path winding through mud and fallen leaves. Sergeant Daniel Harper crouched low inside the open turret of the M18 Hellcat, his eyes scanning every shadow. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and smoke drifting from distant fighting. They had been moving for hours without stopping. This was no longer a simple engagement, it was a hunt. Infantry reported armor ahead, Harper said quietly. We don't rush this. Ahead of them, somewhere beyond the trees, German units were attempting to regroup. Their advance had slowed, but not stopped. The Hellcat's job was not to hold ground or lead an assault. It was to disrupt, confuse, and destroy, then disappear before the enemy could respond. Driver, ease forward, Harper ordered. The Hellcat crept ahead, its engine kept low to avoid detection. Unlike heavier tanks, it didn't need wide roads or open fields. Its lighter frame allowed it to slip through terrain others would avoid. That was part of its strength. Mobility wasn't just about speed, but freedom of movement. Corporal Jenkins adjusted the gun slowly, tracking gaps between the trees. Loader Evans stood ready, gripping a shell, his breath visible in the cold air. Movement, Jenkins whispered. Harper followed his gaze. Through the branches, partially concealed behind a line of bushes, sat a German Panzer IV. It wasn't moving, likely waiting, covering the road ahead. A perfect target, but also a dangerous one. Range, Harper asked. 400 yards. Close. Too close for comfort if they were spotted. Harper considered the options for a split second. They could engage immediately, but if the first shot didn't disable the tank, the return fire would come fast. And at this distance, there would be no escape if they hesitated. Fire and relocate, Harper decided. Jenkins steadied the gun. The forest seemed to hold its breath. On target. Fire. The Hellcat's gun shattered the silence, the blast echoing violently through the trees. The shell slammed into the side of the Panzer IV, punching through its armor. Flames burst from the hull as the German tank lurched violently. Hit confirmed. Move, Harper shouted instantly. Collins didn't wait. The Hellcat accelerated sharply, veering off the path and cutting through the forest at an angle. Branches snapped against the hull as they pushed through terrain that would have trapped heavier vehicles. Behind them, chaos erupted. German infantry scattered, shouting. Another tank engine roared to life somewhere nearby. They know we are here now, Evans said. Good, Harper replied. Let them chase shadows. That was the doctrine. Never stay, never fight on the enemy's terms. The Hellcat burst out of the tree line into a narrow clearing, then immediately turned again, changing direction. Every movement was deliberate, designed to confuse and mislead. If the enemy tried to track them, they would already be somewhere else. Circle back, Jenkins asked. Harper shook his head. Not yet, we make them guess. The crew understood. Predictability was death in a Hellcat. The moment the enemy could anticipate your position, your speed meant nothing. They slowed briefly behind a ridge, using the terrain as cover. Harper raised his binoculars again, scanning the area they had just left. Smoke rose above the trees, marking the destroyed Panzer. But there was more movement now, German units spreading out, searching. They're reacting, Harper said. Too late, Collins muttered. But Harper didn't fully agree. The enemy was learning, slowly but surely. That's why we keep moving, Harper replied. A distant gunshot echoed, another unit engaging somewhere beyond their view. The battlefield was alive, shifting constantly. There were no fixed lines here, only opportunities. New position, Harper decided. We hit again from the flank. The Hellcat moved once more, its engine rising in pitch as it gained speed. Even in the uneven terrain, it maintained a pace that no German tank could match. Minutes later, they reached another vantage point, a slight elevation overlooking a narrow road. And there, Exactly where Harper expected, another German vehicle moved cautiously, its crew scanning for threats. "They're nervous now," Evans said. "Good," Harper replied. "That makes them slower." Jenkins aligned the gun again. "Ready." Harper didn't hesitate. "Fire." The second shot of the ambush struck cleanly. The German vehicle halted abruptly, smoke beginning to rise. "Move, move, move," Harper ordered immediately. The Hellcat vanished again, dropping back behind the ridge and disappearing into the forest before any return fire could find them. Inside the turret, the crew remained focused. No celebration, no wasted motion. This was how they survived. Not by standing their ground, not by trading blows, but by striking hard, disappearing, and forcing the enemy to fight a battle they could never fully see. And out there, somewhere between the trees and the smoke, the Hellcat was already gone, preparing for the next strike. The war was nearing its end, but the fighting had not grown any less dangerous. In the early months of 1945, as Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, Sergeant Daniel Harper and his crew found themselves moving through shattered towns and broken roads, where every corner could hide resistance. The M18 Hellcat beneath them was no longer new or unfamiliar. It carried the marks of months of combat, scratches along the hull, worn metal edges, and the constant smell of oil and burned powder. But its engine still roared with the same relentless energy. Speed had carried them this far. "Strange," Collins said quietly as they rolled past the ruins of a village. "Feels like it should be over by now." Harper didn't respond immediately. He had learned not to trust that feeling. Wars didn't end all at once. They dragged, resisted, and struck back when least expected. "Not yet," he said finally. "Not for us." Ahead, the road opened into a wide clearing. Intelligence reports had warned of scattered German units retreating through the area, some still equipped with heavy armor. Even in retreat, they were dangerous. "Keep your eyes open," Harper said. The Hellcat moved forward at a controlled pace. This late in the war, German crews were more cautious, more desperate. They had learned from encounters with fast-moving American tank destroyers. They knew what to expect now, or at least they thought they did. But speed still changed everything. Tracks, Jenkins pointed out, fresh, leading toward a tree line. Harper studied them. "They're not far." Evans shifted slightly, tightening his grip on a shell. "You think they'll stand and fight?" Harper shook his head. "No, they'll try to survive." It was a subtle but important difference. Earlier in the war, many German crews had relied on their superior armor and firepower, confident in direct engagements. Now, survival had become the priority on both sides. "Same as us," Collins muttered. Harper nodded. "Exactly." They followed the tracks at a distance, using terrain to stay hidden. The Hellcat's engine was kept just below a roar, its speed held in reserve like a coiled spring. Then they saw it. A German tank, partially concealed, positioned defensively near the edge of the forest. It wasn't advancing, it was waiting. "They've learned," Jenkins said quietly. Harper agreed. The enemy wasn't moving blindly anymore. They were choosing positions, trying to counter speed with patience. But the Hellcat still had the advantage. "We don't rush," Harper said. "We outmaneuver." Instead of engaging directly, Collins guided the Hellcat along a wide arc, circling through uneven ground that heavier tanks would struggle to cross. It took time, longer than a direct attack, but time was a resource they could afford when used correctly. Minutes passed in silence. Finally, they reached a new position, slightly elevated, with a clear angle on the German tank's flank. "Now," Harper said. Jenkins fired. The shell struck true, tearing into the side armor. The German tank jolted, smoke beginning to rise almost immediately. "Hit!" "Move," Harper ordered, as always. The Hellcat accelerated away, disappearing behind cover before any return shot could be fired. The action was swift, almost routine now. Strike, relocate, survive. But as they moved, Harper couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. Early in the war, battles had often been decided by who had the thicker armor or the bigger gun. Now, mobility, coordination, and speed were proving just as decisive, sometimes more. The Hellcat had shown that it wasn't invincible. It demanded discipline, awareness, and constant movement. It punished mistakes harshly, but in the hands of a trained crew, it reshaped how battles were fought. "Never thought I'd trust speed more than steel," Evans said, almost to himself. Harper gave a slight smile. "Steel slows you down. And speed keeps you alive," Collins added. Harper didn't answer, but he knew it was true. As they reached another stretch of broken road, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The war was ending, but its lessons would remain. Machines like the Hellcat had changed expectations. They had proven that agility could defeat strength, that timing could overcome firepower. Future designs would carry that lesson forward, blending speed with protection, mobility with precision. The battlefield would evolve, but the core idea would remain the same: adapt or be destroyed. The Hellcat slowed as they approached a new position, its engines settling into a low rumble. Around them, the distant sounds of war continued, fading, but not gone. Harper looked out over the horizon one last time for the day. "Stay ready," he said quietly. Because even as the war drew to a close, the rules that had kept them alive still applied. Move fast, strike first, never be where the enemy expects. And above all, never stop hunting.